compression is definitely a bit of a mystery, especially if you're starting out. You're not exactly sure like what you're doing. It's very hard to hear what you're doing in the beginning, and you're not exactly sure if you're doing the right things in the beginning. So I think the best way to start to get good at compression is to just really understand the compressor, understand what it's doing, understand all of its controls. So that is what we're going to be doing today. We're just going to give a little bit of an overview of the compressor. So let's get started. So what is a compressor? What does it really do? So at its very core, a compressor, all it really knows how to do is to turn down volume. So throughout your signal, you'll set a certain threshold, and then anything that goes above that threshold will get compressed. So obviously, it's not just turning down the volume like a fader, because it does do this compression, which gives it a little bit of a sound. But in essence, all it's doing is taking the louder parts, parts that are going through this signal, and compressing them based on how much you want to compress them. So really, a compressor, all it does is turn down. Now, you may have heard that it makes the louder parts quieter and the quieter parts louder. So how is it that if I just said that all it does is turn things down, how does it make things louder? So you're right. I stand by that. A compressor really all it does is turn things down. But once we're done turning those things down, we then have a gain knob, which we turn up a bit to make up the loss of volume, and that makes up for a more consistent volume. So now the fact is that the quieter parts are a little bit louder, and the louder parts are a little bit quieter. So a compressor at the end of the day should give you a more of a consistent sound. I'm definitely talking within the reference of vocals. When it comes to music and drums, there's sometimes where you can get a compressor for actual like feel and sound, but I'm not going into that today. I'm just going into the basic compression settings for vocals, which is just to get a more of an even performance. So just to recap real quick, if you have a vocal that is sometimes a little quiet and then sometimes a little loud and then sometimes a little quiet, that compressor will come in and try and based on the right controls will make it more of a consistent volume, so more of a consistent signal. So now that we know what a compressor is, let's dive in to look at an actual compressor and what are all these controls. So I have a session right in front of me, and the compressor I'm going to be using for the tutorial today is going to be the Renaissance compressor by Waves, but any compressor will do. Pretty much any compressor, any digital compressor, I should say, will have all of these controls that we're going to be looking at today. So the first control that we're going to look at is the threshold. I mentioned this briefly earlier, and this is basically going to tell the compressor at what point do you want to start compressing. So the general idea is that anything below the threshold gets untouched. Anything above the threshold, that's when all the other controls come into play. So let's play this signal for a second. Let me just solo this vocal. So let's play this for a second. Sorry, I forgot to get my headphones. 1 second. Can't hear anything. All right, that's better. So I'm going to reset this compressor. I don't even know if I love the settings that are on it. So let's just go back to factory default. The threshold is at 0. Everything is at 0. So let me just play that signal one more time. So you see the compressor is not doing anything at all because the threshold is not low enough for any signal to go above. So now let's bring the threshold down a little bit, and you'll see what I mean. So you see that there's some signal under the threshold and some signal over the threshold. Now, nothing's really happening in the compressor yet because we didn't tell the compressor how much we want to compress. At this point, the compressor just thinks that we want the signal above the threshold to also remain untouched. So that's why you're not hearing or seeing anything being different. But the threshold right now, since there's signal going above the threshold, there is signal readily available for the compressor to compress. So anything below the threshold will get untouched, and anything above the threshold will be compressed. Moving on to the next control is the ratio. Now, this control tells the compressor by how much do you want to compress the signal that went above the threshold. So let's say for argument's sake that 2 dB went over the threshold. So the compressor is asking you with the ratio, how much of this dB, these 2 dBs, how much do you want me to actually compress? Do you want me to compress 1 of the dBs, so you'll only get back 1? Do you want me to compress just a half a dB, so you'll only get back, you'll get back 3/4 of what you were with? So the threshold, the ratio is basically there to control this. And by default, the ratio is blank to 1. Okay, so this blank is right now set to 1. So right now it's set to 1 to 1, which is why you saw no compression at all. Because for every 1 dB that goes into the threshold, for every 1 dB that goes above the threshold, I only want 1 dB back. You're going to get back the same amount of, signal. But let's say I do a 2 to 1 ratio. So let's double click here and write 2. So now the ratio is 2. So that means for every 2 dB that goes above the threshold, I want 1 dB back. And that means that the compressor will be halving, meaning cutting in half, this signal that went in originally. So it will be giving us only 1 dB back, and that is a 2 to 1 ratio. If you want to make things easier for yourself, you could take the 2 to 1 ratio, flip it around, and make it a fraction. So this is 1 over 2, which is 1/2. So the compressor will give you 1/2 back. Let's go to 3 to 1 ratio. If we have a 3 to 1 ratio, so that means for every 3 dB, let's do 4 because it's easier to understand. Let's say do a 4 to 1 ratio. So for every 4 dBs, I only want 1 back. That means I am getting back only 1/4 of the signal. So let's do 1 over 4. That means I'm only getting back 1/4 of the signal. So that's how you can really easily understand how much you're really compressing. Obviously, the higher you go in ratio, the more compression you're doing, but that's not necessarily all that relevant because the difference between 1 to 1 ratio and a 2 to 1 ratio is much larger than the difference between a 2 to 1 ratio and a 4 to 1 ratio because it gradually gets less and less. If you do the math, right, a 0 to a half is a lot more than a half to a quarter. So that's just the technicalities of it. So that's the ratio. So we have the threshold, which tells us which signal we want to compress. Then we have the ratio by how much do we want to compress that signal. And then we have the attack and release. I'm not going to go into these too deep. Basically, the attack tells me how fast is it going to take? How long is it going to take for me to get that maximum 4 to, let's say our compressor is set to 4 to 1. How much dB, how fast is it going to take for us to get that maximum 4 to 1 ratio? So in this case, the attack says that it's going to take 16 milliseconds to get all the way up there. So it's kind of like a 0 to 60 in a car. It's going to start compressing, but the maximum compression of 4 to 1 will only happen after 16 milliseconds. The release is similar, like how fast after we're done compressing does it go back to the original signal. So right now that's at 160 milliseconds. For vocals, I usually try to say that the attack should be quite quick, somewhere between 1 and 5 milliseconds, and the release can be somewhere between 150 and 250 or even a little bit higher, depending on how consistent you really actually want to be. So that's how I would set it for vocals. This attack and release definitely comes much more into play when you're using, like when you're doing music and drums and you're looking for a sound and you're trying to, get a compression to give you like a groove or a sound. That will definitely come in more to play there, but I'm definitely going to keep this simple for now. So that is basically all we have. So we have the threshold and ratio, which is the most important. Then we have an attack and release, which we're going to leave pretty much static for right now. And at this point, we have the compressor doing what it's doing best, which is compressing. So let's play our vocal one more time. So you'll see that I'm going above the threshold, and since I'm at a 4 to 1 ratio, which is quite high, I'm getting a negative 8 dB of reduction. This is my reduction right here. I'm getting negative 8 dB. I'm getting 8 dB of gain reduction. So you see I'm getting quite a nice amount of gain reduction. What I like to do, by the way, sometimes when I'm setting up my compressor is first pick the ratio that I want. So let's say in this case I want 2 to 1 ratio. And then I'll put the threshold at 0, and then I'll play the signal and gradually introduce the threshold till I'm getting the amount of gain reduction that I like. Sometimes you could technically do it the other way around. You could set your threshold and then set your ratio to how much gain reduction you want to do. But this is how you want to get, but this is how I generally do it. It's more straightforward way of doing it. Again, the threshold and the ratio both contribute to how much gain reduction you're getting. But this is how I do it. So let's play the signal real quick. And you could just reset the meter, the gain reduction meter, by just clicking it. Yeah, and I'm going for about between 4 and 6 dB of reduction, and that's perfect for me. So now you see that we got our threshold and our ratio, our attack and release all set up, and you see that we're getting the compression is doing its thing. It's turning down the loud parts. Listen when he does na 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 na. That na 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 is not really touched so much in the compressor. Watch. So you see different parts are getting different amounts of compression. And this is perfect for what I want. But the problem is right now that we just kind of made the sound overall lower than quieter than we actually started off with. So this is where the gain comes in. And the gain is done after all is said and done. So let's say we have 6 dB of reduction. You might be tempted to just, give that 6 dB of that we lost, but that's not actually the case. You only lost 6 dB at the loudest points, and we don't want the signal to be overall louder than we had it. So the best thing to do is to use your ears, but a good rule of thumb is to make up half of the maximum gain reduction that you're getting and go from there. So it's usually between half and 3/4, something like that. So I'm gonna do 3 dB and then use my ears to round it off. And I'm gonna use the bypass button on and off to make sure that I'm getting the same feeling of the amount of volume that I had before. So I ended up with 4 dB of makeup gain. So basically, this is how a compressor works. We learned about all the different controls and how to use them. Maybe in a future different video, I'll go into, compressing actual vocals and maybe different settings and different techniques of compression. But this is how a compressor works. Compressor turns down based on what you want. Then you can turn it up and you get a little bit more of a consistent level. Now, pay attention to if you don't have this compressor, that's fine. That's totally fine. Pay attention in your compressor. Let's say the stock EQ, the stock compressor of Pro Tools. Let's bring that up. I will show you that they're all the same controls. So we have the ratio here, we have the threshold here, we have the attack, we have the release, the knee, which is available in some compressors. I'm not going into that. I usually leave it at 0. And then we have the gain. And it has some other criterias and other settings that you can play around with. But these I guess I should say 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, really 5 controls, attack and release you could count as 1, are really the main controls of the compressor, and you will see them in pretty much any compressor that you open up. I hope this video was helpful for you, and if it was, just drop a like. It really does help the YouTube algorithm. And before you go, I want to give you my free home studio gear guide. So if you're looking to start a home studio or upgrade a home studio and you're not sure what gear you want to get and you're also within a budget, don't worry, I got you. I put together an entire PDF listing all the products that you would need in a few different budgets. So there's a few different products for a few different links for each product. Go ahead and download it. It's free in the description. And until next time.